At this point, I genuinely think I've taken anywhere from 750 to 800 sales calls. I've just done the maths on it, and it sits somewhere in between those numbers, right? During that period of time of selling to around 750 to 800 different business owners, I've realized quite a lot about sales, as you imagine, right? So in this video, I really want to break down different sections of selling based on what I've found out and what lessons I've learned along the way of selling to this many different business owners over the period of 2 years. Right, so number one is I realized pretty quickly if I wanted to maintain the level that I was selling at, I needed a consistent pre-call routine. So this is like a 2 to 3 minute routine that I did before every call. And basically beforehand, I would literally just jump onto every call. Like I'd wait for the minute to hit the time. Like, so let's say the call was at one o'clock, like I'd literally wait for it to hit 1 o'clock and then I'd just quickly scramble everything. I'd jump straight on the call. And I was in like a chaotic state, right? I didn't have an opportunity to really just align myself with the intentions of what the call were. And I didn't allow myself to really enter the frame, right? Enter the right frame before going into the call, because the biggest reason that this pre-call sort of situation, this pre-call ritual exists is because not only does it get you in the right frame to sell, but it also allows you to avoid turning one bad call into 2 bad calls, right? You can almost like use this to reset after every call. And then it really reinforces the fact that each call is its own call, right? They're not all grouped together in one day's calls, right? So what I would do is I'd literally just take like 6 deep breaths. If needed, I'll take a walk outside. Sometimes like to the point where I'd literally watch like a video on my phone just to sort of distract me from the sales anxiety that I was getting at the start. Because don't get me wrong, that went away quickly, but the first like 10, 15 calls I did were absolute hell in terms of anxiety. So that was applicable at the start, but then it just became a case of deep breath, setting the intentions. And I really told myself 3 things before each call, and I continue to do so today. Ruthless detachment from the outcome. So I tell myself it doesn't matter as long as I'm doing my best, I'm detached from the outcome. I get a no or yes, it doesn't matter, right? As long as I do the things required to get to that point. Commitment to getting to the truth. So every time I get on a call, I want to know what the exact situation is. I want to know the truth, right? And if I'm good enough in the discovery process, I'll get that every time, right? Also, I want to have fun, right? So as long as I have those 3 things down and I reinforce them in the pre-call routine, like I go into every call feeling a lot better, and no longer do I just jump on the call when the clock hits the time. I give myself 5-10 minutes to do that. Sometimes like 2 or 3 is what it takes. But before, I'd honestly advise taking like 10 minutes just because it's really helpful to go into that frame with the right intention, right? And you're probably not going to have as many calls if you're starting out as well, which means you're going to have more sales anxiety. So take the time to have longer periods of time before you go into the call, really to set yourself in the right frame for it, right? Also, a big thing, like just before I go on to key lessons from the discovery phase of the sales call, is like, I think at the start, I assumed I had to be a certain way to sell. The biggest advice I could give was adopt your own style that feels comfortable. Like, again, like when you first come into sales, you have different sort of perceptions of what a salesman looks like. You need to throw those out the window and really just like learn in your own way. Obviously take inspiration from people, learn from people. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying adopt a style which feels comfortable to you. Do not try and be somebody else when you're selling. It's only going to make you feel uncomfortable and just heighten that anxiety even more, which you're probably dealing with if you're first getting started in this. So adopt your own style and be comfortable with that style. Right. Another thing, which is absolutely key, and it almost sounds stupid to say, is I was almost trying to get better at sales without not even trying to get better at sales. What I mean by that is I thought I'd get better at sales just by taking the sales calls, right? And not actually in my own time, like getting feedback on what I was doing, right? So obviously there was a period of time where I was just taking every call and I was like, okay, I'm getting better at sales. Like I don't need to do anything because I'm just going to get better on every call. Like maybe I'll watch some sales training once. And I was like, okay, I've got that down. Now, if I just keep taking calls, I'll just keep getting better, right? No, it's absolutely stupid, right? A key thing for improvement is getting consistent feedback, which is why watching your calls is so important, because how can you know where you're messing up? How can you know what things you're doing correctly if you're not even watching your calls? You don't even know how it's going because you can't even see yourself doing the calls. So it's why it's so crucial to watch every call, right? And have that intention of getting better at sales. So become obsessed with sales. Watch the training that you have all the time. If you have any training, watch YouTube videos, listen to podcasts, read The Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort. Really get obsessed with sales to the point where it's a key thing that you're doing, and it's one of the primary things you're doing, because even if you're not selling someone on the call, I've said this many times before, you're selling prospects on the idea of getting a meeting with you, selling prospects on the idea of selling clients on the idea of staying with you when you have clients, also selling them on the idea of paying you more money if you're upselling them. SMMA is just sales. It's a people-based business. So you'll never regret learning more about sales and having that intention to get better. And you're only going to do that if you have that feedback. You review your calls, right? You get coaching, whatever, and you keep going back to that training, right? Going into information gathering, aka the discovery phase, there's a lot of key lessons that I learned from this. Number one is asking short and pointed questions, right? So I think at the start, like everyone does this, well, not everyone, but it can be a nerves thing when you're almost like, you don't know what to say, right? So you end up saying a lot of things, which doesn't really mean anything. Like 75% of the words you say in your question don't carry any value, right? There's a real art to being able to ask short to the point questions. And if you do that, you're gonna get short to the point answers, right? So you've probably had it before where you've been on a sales call and you've asked a question and you can't really work out why the prospect is giving you such an ambiguous, vague answer. But if you were to review your call, you could probably see that, okay, the way I asked the question wasn't very clear at all. I preloaded it with a bunch of bullshit words that didn't really make sense. So it kind of confused them and they didn't answer it in the way I wanted to. So there's a real skill to asking it clear, concise, right? And in a way that actually gives you the answer that you want, right? Next one is having a solid frame and learning the frame, learning how to say that frame with confidence, right? Because what I used to do, I used to have my frame, I knew it worked, but I would just read it off the script, right? You want to have a frame that you practice. And trust me, like I'm not just saying this for the sake of saying this, it's going to make a huge difference if you learn your frame off by heart and you can say it without reading off the script. Right, and that goes for pretty much all of the sales process. But the frame is a big one because it's the start of the call. It sets the impression of the call, right? So learn how to say your frame without the script, right? Practice saying it, listen to yourself saying it back and hear how you're saying certain things, right? So listen back to the tonality. This is another reason to review your calls. It's not only what you say, it's how you say it as well. Tonality is huge. For tough questions as well, this is a key thing. Use softeners. So like certain questions may be uncomfortable for you. I know I just said ask short and to the point questions, but there are certain questions where you need to almost soften these questions and you can still make it to the point. And what I'm talking about here is questions that are usually quite uncomfortable to ask. So for example, if you're asking what a business profit margins are, yes, some people can react badly, most people won't, but it can be an uncomfortable question to ask. So instead of saying, what's your profit margins? I'd say, yeah, I'm curious because I've spoken to a lot of different business owners. They usually range between like 40 to 60% in terms of profit margins. I'm curious, like, where do you sit in terms of profits for the business, right? Can you see how saying that, I almost justified asking the question. It's still to the point, it's still clear, but I almost softened it, right? So that was a key thing that I learned, and it really helps reduce that anxiety, especially when starting out, because I used to dread certain questions that I know I needed to ask, right? Another thing is not coaching the prospect, right? I learned this big time. Right, sometimes the prospect I didn't really do this much, but I observed it in a lot of other people that were selling for the first time, is a prospect would open up to them about their pain. Yes, maybe the salesman would dig a little bit into the pain. And then they'd say something, the prospect would say about the pain, right? And then the salesman would almost like jump in and sort of like soften the situation rather than letting them actually sit in the pain, right? So for example, let's say, oh, I'm really struggling with booking appointments through email at the moment. It's been really tough. It's just been like a feast and famine cycle. I keep having to pause and play the campaigns. They're in the pain. They're sort of like recalling the situation that they're in, which is painful. At which point the salesman could jump in and be like, oh no, that's absolutely fine. I mean, if you just fix this, this, and this, it should be fine. It's a simple fix. I mean, we'll get onto that later in the sales process when I talk to you about it. It's like, okay, now the prospect's no longer in pain. So when it comes to you pitching them, talking about the price, whatever, they don't have a logical reason to offset why they'd spend 5-6K or whatever you're charging to reduce the pain because you've softened most of it, right? Another big thing is not judging the prospect, right? Judging the prospect is probably one of the worst things you can do, right? You really want to detach yourself from them, keep a neutral stance, right? Like they're the expert of their own business and their situation. You need to just stay neutral. Right? Don't judge them. You don't know anything about them. That's what you're on the call to do. You're on the call to find out as much about them as possible and then make an accurate decision of whether it's a good fit for them, what you're going to pitch them with, whatever it looks like. So don't judge them. Don't assume that a prospect is a certain way. Don't avoid questions because you're assuming something about the prospect. Always ask the questions, which is why it's bad to make assumptions, because assumptions cost you money, right? Especially in a situation where you can't afford to let things slip. Otherwise, it's going to come up as an objection later in the process. So treat every call almost as the same. You need to ask the same set of questions, right? Obviously, you can have some variation there, but again, never judge the prospects. The big mistake that I made at the start is I would sort of like have an idea of how the prospect was meant to be in my head, and then I would like change parts of the script and change parts of how I was doing things in accordance with like the very brief sort of overview and assessment I'd made of this person within like 15, 20 minutes, whatever. Another big thing, and I didn't do this at the start, there was periods of time where I didn't do this, and a huge period of time where I was doing this, but I wasn't doing it properly. It's taking notes. You need to have a proper note-taking system. Like I'm gonna get a pull one of these up from the whatever that is, the table behind me, right? I have a proper note-taking system, right? So I have a note-taking system which is split into certain parts, so I can use the notes that I'm using as ammo, right, to use in the pitch. Right? I have a background section on here. I have a random section. I have a section which is based on the pitch, so it has pillars 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can see that. So when it comes to pitching the prospect, right, I'm writing down certain things like that I'm going to talk about for pillar 1, pillar 2, based on what they've told me in the information gathering phase. Right, this is extremely important. It's extremely important to have this. Otherwise, what you're going to end up doing is everything's just going to be the same, and you're going to lose out on a huge amount of prospects because you're not able to make it custom for the prospect based on your pitch. Right, and not only is this important for the pitching process, but prospects are going to say certain powerful language, which it says here, that you can use to go deeper, right? Sometimes a prospect may give you an answer and they may say like 5 different things that you want to probe deeper into, but how are you meant to listen to the prospect and at the same time remember what they've said to allow you to go deeper, which is why it's so essential to have one of these, have a good note-taking system so you can write those things down and then bring it up so you can go deeper into the prospect situation, right? It's extremely important, right? Get comfortable with silence, right? It's extremely important. Like every time you ask a question, wait, pause, let the prospect give you your answer, give you their answer, and then pause, because you'd be amazed at how many times a prospect will add something onto their answer once you've waited like 2-4 seconds. They're always going to jump in, they're always going to add something extra, right? Because it's kind of like people naturally are uncomfortable with silence. If you're comfortable with silence on a sales call, you're at a huge advantage because prospects will try and fill that silence, which is a big hack to get them just to open up to you more and give you more ammo to use in the pitching process. Keep tonality neutral when you're asking questions. Do not use upward inflecting tonality like that. Do not use downward inflecting tonality. That's more of a deep voice. But yeah, try and keep that tonality neutral, kind of like how I'm speaking right now. There's a time and a place for upward inflecting tonality, downward inflecting tonality, but generally in the information gathering phase, just keep it neutral, keep it on one sort of tone, right? Yes, it's can be important to switch things up, but that comes in the pitching process. Right? We're not speaking for the majority of this discovery phase. We're just asking clear to the point questions, which get deep on the pain and run them through each part of the discovery script, right? Ask your question and then shut up is a big thing, right? Interrupt the prospect when necessary. I can't talk about like how many different times, even sometimes happens now. Like the average prospect will do this a little bit, but it is rare that this needs to happen. But for, let's say 1 in every 20 calls, you get a prospect that just jumps on the call, probably even more frequently than that, and they just won't shut up. Like you ask them a question, even if you're asking like straight to the point questions, you ask them like, let's say, what's your monthly revenue, and they somehow manage to turn that into like a 5-minute answer. In the case of that happening, it makes sense to interrupt the prospect. And yes, you can say like, oh, I could come across as rude, but you can do it in a way that's not rude. And what's rude is letting them speak for the majority of the call, so you don't get to ask your other questions and you don't even get to pitch them and prescribe them the solution that you know can help them because they've just bullshitted you around for so much more of the call and just turned one question into like 5 minutes. So you've missed certain parts of your script, so you can't properly help them, right? So the way I like to interrupt prospects is like, I actually first of all like to just like show that I'm actually listening. So this is why having the camera on is so important. So I can look at them, I can make sounds like, yeah, makes sense, okay. Like when they're saying certain things, and even that subconsciously kind of shows them like, okay, I want to say something now. If that doesn't work, I just straight up interrupt them. I say, okay, I find it really interesting what you're saying about X, Y, and Z. referencing the bullshit that they've just said. But what I really want to address is, and then go into the next question, right? Can you see how that is more polite and it's a better way of doing things? I used to let prospects, when like someone would come into the call and they would just want to speak for hours and hours, I would let it happen. I'd let them walk over it. And then before you know, like bang, that's the end of the call, right? And it wastes so much time and it's good for no one. It benefits no one, right? So going on to the pitching phase, keeping your pitch benefits focused is like a huge thing. I see so many people still method selling. I definitely did it at the start. I remember posting like a pitch that I made in a group, in like a Facebook group that I was in, a coaching program. And I remember one of the guys literally said, why are you talking about setting up email domains? Why are you talking about email deliverability? Prospects could not give less of a shit about these things. Talk about what's in their best interest. It's the old age sort of saying in this space of sell the vacation, not the plane ride, whatever it may be. It's absolutely true. Like if you go through your pitch right now, you can probably find like at least 5-10 different points where you're method selling. Obviously there's a time and a place to talk about specific things, but usually that should come up when the prospect asks you about those things, because they really care less about how they're going to get to the point. They just want to know that they can get to the point, right? So that they can get from current situation to desired situation. They want to know about the outcomes, not about every little nuance. Using discovery as ammo for the pitch, which is why note taking is so important. So questions that you get, you can write answers, good answers that you get that you know you can leverage in how you're selling, write them down. And that's all a discovery is. It's just about eliminating objections before the close through proper questioning and getting good answers, which you can use as ammo for the pitch. And you can tie that into the benefits that I've just talked about. So I didn't do this before. Like this was a huge mistake I made. I would just pitch prospects with almost the same thing because I didn't have a note-taking system. I wasn't properly asking the right questions, and every pitch would just be exactly the same. And I missed out on a huge amount of sales because I didn't make it custom based on what was best for the prospect because I wasn't doing the discovery well enough. Don't information dump as well. Like I cannot believe I did this at the start. Like I used to pitch prospects and my pitch used to be, let's say 5 minutes long. And I would have this huge dump of information, right? I'd just be like verbal, like dump on them. I'd like verbally shit on them with like 5 minutes of information, right? And obviously when I ask at the end, do you have any questions? Of course they have questions. Have they had time to process any of those questions? No, because I've just been speaking at them for so long, right? So have regular check-ins. I'm gonna get on in the next point about how you can structure this, but again, you want to have regular check-ins, like asking questions every time you talk about a pillar of your service or whatever it may be, saying, what are your thoughts on this stage? Any questions on this stage? Like the first question I just said, what are your thoughts on this stage? Assumes they have thoughts on that stage and they want to ask questions. So it's very different to saying like, any questions on this stage? Because a lot of time they may have questions, but they may just want to hear the rest of it. So they say no. Right, so you miss a big chance to address that uncertainty early, right? So I would ask questions in a way that assumes they have questions, right? So what are your thoughts on this stage? What are your questions on this stage? What do you think about this stage, right? What certain points do you feel like need addressing more at this point, right? Things like that, right? That allow you to go into more detail and raise that level of certainty. A big thing is like, I like to structure my pitch across 3 elements, right? So I have the high level promise at the start where I really talk about my outcome statement. So like we help X, which is tailored to them. Like, so I help marketing agencies. If a marketing agency gets on the call and they're doing 50K a month, I'm not going to say we help marketing agencies at 5 to 10K a month. No, I'd say we help marketing agencies at 50 to 60K a month, right? So talk about your high level promise that we help marketing agencies at doing revenue that they've just told you they're doing, solve biggest pain point that they've just told you they're suffering with, without, again, a huge pain point that they're dealing with that they want to avoid, right? So you have that sort of outcome statement at the start, which you talk about your expertise, and then you can go into your key pillars, which is like the 3 to 5 core pillars of exactly what you do. And that's when you can really add those check-ins for the questions, right? And then talk about the delivery and keep this at a high level. Right, what this does is prospects want to actually know how it's delivered. So you can kind of talk about whether it's like a done with you, a done for you, whether it's one-to-one. Talk very, I like to, when I'm talking about the delivery, I like to sort of offload that and say it's all going to be discussed in the onboarding call, which it is. right? So I say, okay, on the onboarding call, we'll give you an exact roadmap. We're going to talk about what's exactly needed from you, items we're going to take care of, items you're going to take care of, and so forth. So keeping that a high level as well. And this sort of buys you time, right? When you've closed, if you do close, they're going to give you a hell of a lot of questions about what's next. This sort of eliminates that before you close them. So it's really helpful. And it answers a lot of questions and deals with a lot of uncertainty before you drop the price. Next thing is when you're pitching. I know there's a lot of stuff to take in. Maybe I should have made this 2 videos, but who knows? Let me know in the comments if you actually think this is good info. I think it is. So you don't want to sound scripted, right? So this is a huge lesson I learned, and I'm talking about all of these lessons from personal experience. I would sound scripted, and when I first started listening back to my calls, which was probably too late, right? Then I should have started listening back to the calls, because I probably took about 30 calls before I started doing that, right? I noticed how scripted I sounded, right? You want to sound natural. You want to sound natural. Your tonality needs to be on point. This is not the point where, like in the information gathering phase, your tonality is neutral. Here, you want to be using as much body language, as much switching up in tone and cadence and volume as possible, so you can really give that conviction to the prospect, right? So don't sound scripted. The worst thing you can do is sound scripted. And it's a lot easier to not sound scripted when you're using this note-taking process and you're using the notes to truly make the pitch custom to the prospect, and you're not reading it off a script, because you should know your script off by heart. You should know your script. You should be able to say it extremely easily. It should come naturally to you, and you should be able to add certain nuances in there based on what they've told you before, right? So you can truly make it custom. That's the pitching phase. There's one more phase that I like to talk about, which I only added, admittedly, probably within the last 100 to 200 calls. This was the committing phase. And this phase has done absolute wonders for my sales. This is huge, right? So after you've gone through, right, the delivery, what it looks like, the pitch, everything like that, you want to have a phase which gives a temperature check on the prospect. So what this does is it says okay, how do you actually feel about the process specifically? If a prospect answers me with anything other than, yeah, no, man, it actually sounds amazing. It sounds like literally exactly what I need. Tell me more, right? Cool. If they answer with anything other than that, what I want to do is I want to tie down the prospect. I want to get a sense of what their certainty is before the before the close. This is critically important, because what we can do here is so tie down on the certainty, right? Tie them down on the process, right? And if they give me an answer other than, yeah, 100%, this is what I want, whatever, right? I would say something like, okay, so what's really important for us is we're aligned on this going forward, because when we work with you on this, we're in the trenches with you. We're as involved in making this work as you are. So it's really important for us that you feel good about the process. So with that being said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I absolutely hate this guy, I just want to get off the call as soon as possible, and 10 being okay, this is exactly what I need to hit my goal and solve this pain point, where do you feel like you fall exactly? Right? And then, right, you can really get the uncertainty, right? And what this really helps you to do is if they say anything other than if they say anything below an 8, you can say, okay, yeah, it's interesting. What's keeping you from being a 9 or a 10? And then again, you can then tie it back. You can then address the uncertainty. You can then ask them the question again, make sure they are at anywhere from an 8 to a 10, right? And then when you drop the price, you can hold them accountable, right? You can hold them accountable to what they said before. You're like, okay, that's weird because we covered the whole process. You asked your questions. You said you're a 9 out of 10 level of certainty on this. You knew it is exactly what you needed, but now we've spoken about price. You're saying you need to think about it. What's really going on here? So you can hold them accountable to what they said before, which is really important, right? So again, after I've done this temperature check, I've got their buy-in on the certainty. I've answered the questions. I've uncovered any hidden agendas behind questions as well, because it's a big thing. Sometimes prospects will ask you a question, right? And that question will have a hidden agenda behind it. So let's say you're selling a course, right? And you're speaking to a prospect, you've uncovered what they've tried in the past, whatever, right? They say, okay, yeah, I'm curious, is there going to be coaching calls in this program, right? The average salesperson would jump in and be like, oh yeah, absolutely. We got one on Monday, which is lead sourcing. We got one on Tuesday, which is meetings. One on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then like the person asking the question, the prospect could be like, oh, okay, yeah, I mean, it wasn't really like exactly what I was looking for because, I mean, like I was in a program before and there was like 500 people in the program. And honestly, I'd try and ask my question, but there was just so many people on there, I could never get it answered. And it honestly felt like they didn't really care about me. So a better way to answer that question initially would be to like, you'd be like, yes, I mean, we do coaching calls, but is there a specific reason why you asked that? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to make sure that the support is good enough because on this last call, etc., on this last program I joined, etc., etc., etc. All right, and now you have like, you've really understood why they're asking the question. So now you can formulate your response in a way that raises their level of certainty. So you can say, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense, man. I hate it when that happens. I've had the same thing happen to me. I mean, I guess what's different about us is a lot of our stuff is one-to-one based. So as well as having the coaching calls, which is limited to only like 30 to 50 people, and we have enough coaches in there so you can get your question answered straight away. If for whatever reason that doesn't happen by some miracle or some opposite of a miracle, you can reach out to us directly and you can get that one-to-one support, right? So you can see how that suits exactly what they need, what they want, a lot better than saying, yeah, we do this, we do coaching calls 5 days a week, whatever, and then not really addressing the hidden agenda behind the question. Right, so once I've done that temperature check and I've answered the questions in the best way, I cover next steps. So this allows me to paint a picture like directly after they make an investment with me, what's going to happen, like what the next sort of steps are. So like telling them, before actually telling them what the investment is, I tell them exactly what's going to happen after, right? So I'll say something like, okay, so what will happen? You basically talk about the onboarding. You're going to process the investment with me. What we're going to do immediately after that is we'll book in an onboarding call. And in the meantime, I'm going to give you some quick intake homework to complete where basically I want to have you send in your current outreach scripts, your current sales process, whatever, so I can tweak a few things there even before we've had our initial onboarding call. What I found is most people end up closing at least a deal or two before we have that first call, right? Just because it's so valuable to get that external feedback. Like something like that, which talks about the next steps. Again, it still keeps it outcomes focused. So we're not only keeping it outcomes focused in the pitch, we're keeping it focused across every section of this back half of the sales process, right? After we've done that information gathering phase, right? So, and then it's the investment, right? I made a huge mistake with the investment of I would almost like drop, like, so I'd build this whole level of trust with the prospect and then I'd like drop the price like an anchor, right? So a lot of people will do that where they'll just say the price and they'll shut up. Yes, I like to do that and I think it's important, but only for a certain period of time. Because again, the prospect needs to understand what the price is, but sometimes if there's like a 10 seconds, like I don't see a problem with asking, okay, how do you feel? What are your thoughts? How do you feel about it? And then it sort of prompts them to get talking, and then from there you can handle the objections, right? So don't have this price where it's like you've built all this rapport and then you talk about the price and it's just like huge like anvil drop on the prospect, right? You want to do it in a way that still maintains that rapport, still maintains that communication, and you can do that just by talking about what the price is. Yes, you have that silence, but then you can like open up the floor for them to give you their opinion on what it's like. And then from there, you can handle the objections. The last video I made was going over the fundamentals of objection handling. If you want an entire video where I talk about how I actually handle objections, like specific things I say, right? Looping patterns, whatever, risk mitigators, how I overcome financial objections, support objections, other objections, things like that, like trust-based objections. Let me know and I'll make a video about that. If you want information about anything that we do, right, there's a link in the description where you can book in a call with me. We help marketing agencies. A big part of what we help them with is based on sales, right? Booking more meetings, sales, making sure their offer is optimized. We work with them across a myriad of different things, right? With the main thing, just building predictable systems to help them with client acquisition. We're not a program, not anything like that. We work with you one-to-one directly to make this happen. If you're interested at all in that, I've just dropped like 30 minutes of this. Hopefully you're actually at the end of this video, but you can book in a call with me in the description. All right, that's everything. Thank you for watching the video, and let me know if you have any more ideas of what you want me to talk about. I'll see you soon.